Hey guys, what's up? It's once again it is MP4Podcast.com, bringing you guys some of the most interesting video game news that you guys really do need to know about. Now, Tomb Raider, the definitive version for the PlayStation 4, will be 1080p at 60 frames per second. However, the Xbox One version will still be 1080p, but only at 30 frames per second. Now, both versions will not have locked-in frame rates, so they can't fluctuate frame rates here and there depending on what is on the screen. Now, a lot of Xbox One users are really upset about this as of right now. A lot of Xbox One users did give Microsoft a break because they were launch titles, saying that the games were not optimized that good. You know, we know about the whole shebang with Battlefield, but Battlefield was a disaster on pretty much every platform with bugs and so on. Not saying Battlefield 4 Online is not a good game. However, it is very buggy. Now, the Xbox One uses DDR3 RAM, which is very good RAM for your CPU, but it's not really the best RAM for your GPU. Now, Microsoft did know that this was kind of going to be a bottleneck for the GPU, and that's why Microsoft did implement ESRAM to help speed up the data for the GPU. However, you know, people have to take more time while they're programming to send this extra data through this other, side road when that data needs to get to the GPU. So a lot of this seems very similar to some of the problems that the Wii U is having, where people are saying, yeah, the Wii U it's a little bit, it's more powerful than 360 and PS3, but the games don't really look that much better. And the Wii U, not saying the Wii U is on the same par with PlayStation 4 or Xbox One at all. However, it can outperform PS3 and Xbox 360 if it's programmed correctly. And they're just not programming for the Wii U because they need to send certain data over to the GPU to do characteristics of the CPU, and people are just not going to take all that extra time to write all that special code. I'm not saying it's hard, it's just saying it just takes more time to do. And that's the problem with the Xbox One, I believe, because a lot of people are saying, how hard is it to optimize for the Xbox One or the PlayStation 4? They're both x86. However, when you put all these side roads, these side, avenues and whatever where RAM has to travel, it takes more people to program for that. Now, I will say this about the ESRAM. From what my understanding and what I've read up from what other people who are much more knowledgeable about the subject than I am, the ESRAM can speed up the GPU, but it's only really going to be a benefit when you're in small scenes, right? Like maybe you're in a room, maybe you're, like Lara Croft is walking down the forest or something like that. However, big scenes with big explosions, big maps, that ESRAM, that 32 megabytes, isn't going to work out that great because it still has to pull data out of the DDR3. And the DDR3 RAM is not that speedy for feeding the GPU. So who knows if they're going to be able to optimize it that well. I do think that you will see games from especially Microsoft exclusives that are really under the Microsoft license, like 343 Studios, like the Halo and so on. They will probably really optimize the code especially well for the Xbox One, the operating system and everything like that. But I will say this: when the PlayStation 4 was being developed, the rumor was that it was going to have 4 gigs of GDR5. And a lot of people were saying, well, GDR5 really isn't that good because it has latency. But Sony was like, well, this RAM is really good for video games. And the latency that's in the GDR5 isn't a problem for video games, especially, 3D games. Maybe it would have some latency for like a next generation 2D game, but I'm joking a little bit right there. But it's great for video games. And the problem you would run into problems with GDR5 if you were running like server applications or business applications, on like your desktop or like a server someplace. That's where the GDR5 would be a problem. However, that latency really doesn't seem to be at a problem at all for the PlayStation 4. All the games are looking really good. Most of them are coming out at 1080p at 60 frames per second. With the Xbox One, the Xbox One seems to be a 720p 60 frames per second system or a 1080p at 30 frames per second system. And a lot of people are going to be saying, well, the Xbox One sucks. And, I'll say this. I've owned almost all the consoles, right? The most important thing when you're gaming is what controller is the most comfortable for you. Is the Xbox One controller more comfortable, or is it the PlayStation 4? If you go over to somebody's house and just play a game for about 10-15 minutes and see what controller you like better, go with that console. Because I'm going to tell you, over long periods of time, if you don't like the controller, if it's not comfortable in your hands, you're not going to have a fun experience. Now, am I saying that Tomb Raider is going to be bad on the Xbox One at 30 frames per second? No, I'm not. It's still going to be a great game. It's still going to be lots of fun. And if you only have an Xbox One, then you should probably pick it up. The graphics in that game are going to look great. However, I do want to talk about 30 frames per second. I know there are some people out there that do like lower frame rates, believe it or not. Their argument is that the game looks more cinematic. And there is some truth to that. When you watch a movie, it's at 24 frames, and once in a while you may be watching something that was at 25 frames. It was filmed in Europe or something. But, they add motion blur to those frames in movies. Because you film at 24, you set your shutter at double what your frame rate is. So there is motion blur between frames. In video games, you don't have that motion blur. You have still. But even without the motion blur, when you are playing a video game at 30 frames per second, you are receiving less data into your eye. And a lot of people will make the argument that that is much more relaxing, that your eyes are not as busy. When you do look at 60 frames per second, you are pulling in twice as much data. And some people will say maybe it gives them a little bit of motion blur, or however. There are some people that prefer 60 frames per second. There are some people that prefer 30 frames per second. However, I feel that the 99% or 95% want the 60 frames per second. But if you want 30 frames per second, then by all means, I have no problems with that. I do want to say this. I wish video game companies, if like, let's say the PlayStation 4, obviously can do the 60 frames per second. Why not offer, in the options, play the game at 60, 30, or even 24? I think another interesting thing would be to implement technology that would add in motion blur to make it more cinematic. Again, I am not defending the Xbox One by only having 30 frames per second. I'm just acknowledging that there are some people out there that do prefer a lower frame rate for their visual purposes. However, I do want to say this. The Xbox One, as of right now, it is a 720p, like I said, 60 frames per second system, or 1080p at 30 frames per second system. If you are going to buy a next generation video game console, buy the console, one with the exclusive. Well, I would say the controller is the most important thing. What controller feels the most comfortable to you, and then pick what exclusives you want the most. That will be the deciding factor on which console you get. Nobody else can tell you any difference. But I will say this as of right now. Microsoft really does have to optimize their code as much as possible. So the last thing that I really do want to touch upon is Call of Duty Ghosts. There's a big controversy about the Xbox One being 720p at 60 frames per second. One of the rumors was that Infinity Ward wanted to be able to disable the Kinect to be able to get an extra 10% boost to run Call of Duty Ghosts at 1080p at 60 frames per second. Microsoft said no. Also, there was a very long embargo on Call of Duty Ghosts, the Xbox One version. Now, a lot of people say, well, Kinect doesn't use Call of Duty. Call of Duty Ghosts. That's stupid. No, it's not, because Kinect software is always running in the background. Always running in the background. Yeah, you can have your Kinect hooked up, and you're not even use it. But if you say Xbox start Netflix, Xbox start Skype, it's going to have close Call of Duty goes down, and it's going to open up Netflix. That data is always running. And that camera is always on, looking at you. It's scanning you. It's watching what your mouth is saying, your hand gestures and stuff like that. That's what they want you to be able to disable. They get that extra 10% boost that would have probably given Call of Duty Ghosts 1080p at 60 frames per second. So anyway, guys, this has been mp4podcast.com. If you enjoyed this video, please give me a thumbs up. Also, let me know what you guys think in the comments below. You guys have yourself an awesome day.